So I've got a theory I've been stewing on for years about Kreia from Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, a favorite game of mine. Given that I intend to talk about the way theory and interpretation can elevate world building sometime soonish, this felt like a great time to bring up my theory. For the sake of avoiding bait and clarifying spoilers and all that, this theory is pretty early game and not massively consequential. It's not going to upend our understanding of Kreia as a character. Mostly. We're going to have to cover some ground before we get into the theory itself, however, and for the people who've played the game as much as I have, consider it a refresher. We're exploring Kreia's character through the general arc of Citadel Station and her response to an environmentalist spiritualist leader named KOTOR2. Here's how I see Kreia as a character. She's an enigmatic mentor figure who responds to player choices with snippets of her philosophy, which is not Jedi, not Sith, but a secret third thing. That's her whole vibe. Discussions of where she falls on an alignment chart, both within and beyond the constraints of Star Wars, would lack the proper dimensions to cover who she is, but we'll refer back to that later. Following what I can only call the longest tutorial section in the history of RPGs, the player character known as the Exile arrives at Telos. Telos is a war-torn planet in the midst of restoration projects. After a detour into police custody, the Exile is courted by two factions seeking to work with her, both of whom having a hand or vested interest in the restoration projects. There's the Ithorians, who essentially run a non-profit seeking to restore the devastated planet's surface, and Czerka, a mega-corporation hoping to get those government contracts for itself. The two choices fall into the light side, dark side binary that shapes most decisions in the game. Usually in games like this, your party members would lean towards the differing sides as a way to introduce you to the concept of choice and consequence. That kinda happens. Your two party members don't favor opposing options so much as caution against them, respectively. Atton is your voice of caution against working with Czerka, not out of concern for working with Czerka proper, but for how working with Czerka involves the Exile with a criminal cartel known as the Exchange, which has a massive bounty out on all Jedi. Not someone you want to be proximal to when they want to stick a knife in you. Atton's concern is very clear and present. Czerka happily worked with a criminal syndicate that put a bounty out on the Exile's head that quite literally persists as a source of ambushes for the entire game. Atton has a nose for underworld scumminess and a self-preservation drive that recognizes trouble. Kreia, on the other hand, is different.
Perhaps KOTOR2 should turn his eyes to his own people, if they truly suffer so.
Backing up a bit, Czerka tries to sell itself to the player as the better choice with a twofold approach. One, offering the money and material reach of a megacorp against the dwindling resources of a non-profit environmentalist organization, and two, insinuating that the Ithorians have been threatening the Exile. The latter point is not a caution so much as itself a threat. The Czerka representative, Jana Lorso, expressing knowledge of a means to threaten the Exile, is effectively saying, I know your weakness. At no point do the Ithorians actually come across as suspicious or intent on any action against the Exile. And to be fair, Kreia doesn't care about that. She doesn't buy into it. Her distrust of the Ithorians runs deeper. She's skeptical of their ability to help, irrespective of their intent to do harm or material shortcomings. She also isn't especially tempted by the monetary benefits of working with Czerka so much as the possibility that they offer a clear path to getting your ship back, something that matters in the broader scheme. For perspective, keep in mind that while she disdains charity, she also disdains shaking people down for money. But this is where things get iffy to the point I wouldn't be surprised if someone thought of it as a plot hole. Kreia claims that Czerka's motivations are clear and known and simple. A profit motive is easy to understand. But we, the player, if working against Czerka, experience how duplicitous they can be, and when working with Czerka, we're the ones doing explicitly duplicitous stuff. Is that a paradox? Czerka's lack of loyalty to anyone but profit, while predictable for a megacorp, casts significant doubt on their trustworthiness so long as the Exile has that aforementioned massive bounty on her head. Granted, the Exchange attack you and are dealt with on either path, so it's not exactly evidence that Czerka and the Exchange are still working together, but the capacity to work together, or having done so in the past, is explicitly stated by Jana Lorso. Kreia, being the cautious and calculating character, seems like it would bias her more against the faction that wouldn't hesitate to throw you out an airlock if it meant better performance in the next galactic fiscal quarter. But her mistrust is instead heaped onto the Ithorians. The Ithorian leader Chodo promises the possibility of healing the exile's invisible scars from a war she fought in. Given that this is Star Wars, we're not euphemistically talking about PTSD, the exile's ability to use the Force was wounded, torn away somehow. He's offering to help heal a magical wound. Kreia initially attacks this with a very plain skepticism, followed by an attack on their efficacy with respect to healing Telos. She then reminds the player that we have already begun to heal, and that the offer might thus be worthless. After leaving and performing a task for the Ithorians, Kreia voices more discontent, this time taking an angle similar to Janna's claim that they threatened the exile. She insinuates Chodo has an agenda, that there's some secret nefarious nature to the Ithorians. So finally, we arrive at my theory. Kreia is afraid of what Chodo could do. Like Lorso's invocation of the exchange threat by claiming the Ithorians put it out there first, Kreia is insinuating an agenda onto Chodo to deflect from her own. Reminder, when Chodo offers to heal the exile, Kreia calls this an empty promise, but my theory is that she's afraid of the inverse. She's worried that Chodo can make good on the promise to heal the exile. Mind you, Kreia has no objection to the exile healing in a general sense. In fact, it's a primary goal of hers. Her reasoning for staying on Telos rather than just finding a way to escape is that she believes there could be Jedi on the surface, and that they could help the healing process. Whatever process, whatever form of healing Chodo offers, it threatens her design on how the exile ought to heal. Imagine it like the exile is Kreia's little bonsai tree, being meticulously grown a certain way. Chodo is offering fertilizer that could alter the growth. Or maybe a different metaphor is like alternative medicine, but that gets weird when we're talking about a universe where Space Wizard's spirit energy is objectively real and well understood. Like, Kreia's position is not the scientific, rational option, she still wants the exile to see a Space Wizard about undoing a spiritual wound. Or perhaps she sees Chodo as like a chiropractor. I think Kreia is afraid on another level. She wants to maintain an influence over the exile that in some ways Chodo undermines by offering an alternative route to heal. Now, it's not an option in-game, but provided Chodo's promise works, could that not imply there are other ways to heal? Ones that might pull the exile away from her journey? Ones that don't mean committing to finding a collection of Jedi Masters spread across the galaxy in hiding with whom the exile may have a degree of personal animosity and in some positions might blame for having wounded her in the first place? And who's to say those Jedi are actually in a position to heal her? All the exile knows is that what Chodo did worked. Kreia needs the exile to continue her journey, and she needs the exile to do it under her exclusive guidance. That is all she seeks. But there's one more piece of evidence. There's an easy-to-miss conversation tucked at the tail end of the Telos arc. Following some, droid hijinks...
What the...
You're automatically put back in front of Chodo to turn in the quest, and in the following conversation, he finally provides healing. Now, because of the droid mission prior, your party members are removed from the party, which means that if the player doesn't think to add them back to the party before starting the conversation, Kreia isn't there to object one final time. These are the words of her final objection.
You speak well enough, Chodo, but perhaps you see all this as your chance to exert your own hold over others.
Perhaps you see all this as your chance to exert your own hold over others. So what about flaws with the theory? And how did we get here? And what did I mean when I tabled talking about alignment? As intimated before, there is a possibility that Kreia's side-picking is a structural contrivance, that game structures necessitated an introduction to the two ways to do a planet's story setup, which several chapters have, itself necessitated by the light side versus dark side dichotomy. This setup works better when there are more characters in a player's party who can each articulate their position on who to side with. Sometimes said characters have direct stakes in the sides, and others they have their own moral compass or experiences guiding them. With Telos, you only have those two party members with you, and it's early enough that they're still introducing the world a bit and the characters and concept of choice and consequence. If that's indeed why Kreia gets slotted as anti-Ithorian path while Atton is anti-Circa, it's a choice that creates an issue, but I don't think it excuses it. It makes sense to set this up early on as a recurring interaction within the game world, but it's hampered a bit by how the Exile's two options are coded light and dark side. See, the two characters with the Exile are considered neutral in vastly different ways. One being an indifferent, run-from-it-all, don't-get-involved, out-for-himself scoundrel, and the other being a distanced manipulator who pulls strings rather than being caught in them. It's notable that neither character has a good reason to side with either choice so much as reasons against working with one. Both of these characters are not the sort to involve themselves in things. Half of Atton's character arc is about him running from his problems. There's no moral Paragon member standing with the Ithorians or cutthroat merc suggesting you side with the money and power of Zerka. In fact, as a fun inversion, on paper, you've got the guy with a literal job class, Scoundrel, saying don't do the dark side money option, and the Jedi saying don't do the light side altruism option. But that said, it almost makes Kreia's investment in decidedly not siding with the Ithorians all the more compelling. In that light, I can't just write it off as a product of gameplay necessity or Telos being the tutorial for consequences. The game, in showing us a vulnerability we aren't really set to recognize without the benefit of hindsight, adds a certain depth to Kreia. It adds a nervousness, a moment where, for all her calculations and authority, her plan is fragile. It's something you might not even think to pick apart, unless you know how the story goes from there, but it's also not big enough to significantly reconsider mid-game. And the game itself never calls attention to it or lets the player go, hey, what was up with that? The ambiguity of it all allows room for depth, even if it's speculative. Getting a bit more meta with it, as a character, Kreia is remarkably challenging to get right by virtue of the medium. The story has set outcomes, set options of interaction, set dialogue choices, set limitations on challenging or accepting her philosophy and perspective. A character that's built up to be wise and subtle and methodical and competent is only as believable as we let them be. A character designed to be compelling with high-minded philosophical comments only comes off as smart so long as they sound smart to us. In fact, that's a bit of a theme when it comes to Obsidian games given Caesar in New Vegas. Personally, I think Kreia is well done, enough so that I had hundreds of words to spare on her perspective and psychology. Similar to how games rely on the illusion of a broader world outside the play area, they also construct the illusion of fuller persons beyond the windows we get into characters, and I'd say this one was well constructed. That's all, no conclusion section, no cringy game theory joke or drawn out dramatic pauses, just a thought I've had for a long time and how it stretches onto the wider idea of character and world development. I've actually done a video about theory crafting before, but it was my third one or something, and it turns out that Dark Souls 2 and Romantic English poetry isn't a winning combo, so it didn't do well. Speaking of do well, thanks to everyone who got this far or shared the video, what have you. Special thanks to the people who make me making these things to make you think things possible. Particularly John Ursa, Chandler Mason, Defender, Freddy, Galactic Beyond, Mark Soto, Nick, and 9 Sugar. And with that, bye for now.